Hello, I'm Michelle Kang, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at NACI. I'm here today with Barbara Kaiser and Judy Sklar Razminski, the authors of NACI's new book, Addressing Challenging Behavior in Young Children, The Leader's Role. We'll be discussing the genesis of the book, why it's so important for our current culture, and how early education leaders will benefit from it. Barbara Kaiser is a consultant and trainer on challenging behavior in young children and has worked with early childhood educators, children, and their families for over 40 years. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, thank you.
And Judy Sklar Razminski is an award-winning freelance writer specializing in education and health. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
Great. We're so delighted to have both of you here today. Barbara and Judy, why did you want to write this book? Tell me the inspiration behind this topic.
Well, I think for me, it was really that I recognized while I was working in childcare that a child's challenging behavior has a huge impact, not only on that child, but also on all the other children and all the educators and even all the families of the other children, as well as that family. It can affect the children's ability to learn and to feel safe, and it can lead qualified, experienced educators to question their own ability and families of the other children to threaten to withdraw their child from the childcare center or school. And it puts administrators in a really difficult position because they're between a rock and a hard place, just trying to figure out how they can advocate for the educators, that child, all the children, and all the families. And having seen this firsthand, I know how administrators struggle to define their role and remain true to what they believe was the vision and the mission of the center or school when all of this starts to happen.
Our interest in challenging behavior actually started with a 2.5-year-old named Andrew. At the time, Barbara was the director of an early childhood center, and she and her staff had certainly encountered plenty of children with difficult behavior over the years. But this was the first time that they lacked the skills to deal with this behavior or to support the child, despite all their training and experience.
And in all honesty, even though I had terrific educators, some of them wanted me to ask Andrew to leave, to ask his parents to withdraw him. But I was committed to keeping him there because I just don't believe in asking any child to leave. I kept thinking about the effect that that can have on a child's sense of self and even on the family's feelings about that child's behavior. I knew that I had to find a way to support my staff and to keep everyone safe. But as this was happening, I have to confess, I really didn't know how.
Well, luckily, at the same time, we were involved in another project, and Barbara was traveling to lots of meetings and centers across North America. And so she had the opportunity to ask people everywhere she went how they were dealing with challenging behavior. And it turned out she wasn't the only one who needed help. Plenty of others were having trouble too.
But I did learn a lot about the importance of building a team, opening the doors of communication, providing professional development, and how to get the other families on board. My staff and I worked together once I returned. We attended workshops, we read articles, and we tried really hard and worked on putting new ideas in motion. We looked at the changes that we needed to make to the physical environment, the program, ways to support social emotional learning. And most important of all, we looked at ourselves and our expectations and our responses to children's inappropriate behavior. And then a couple of years later, Justin arrived, and he was another child with challenging behavior. And when he came, it was really interesting because the staff were actually anxious to put everything that we had been working on into practice. After less than 2 months, Justin had made friends and was able to enjoy his day. And I realized that when educators and administrators work together, they know, understand themselves, and they know what to do, they can make a big difference in a child's life.
As Barbara did more and more consulting, she became more and more convinced that leaders needed help every bit as much as teachers did. And this became her focus. If she could help leaders learn how to provide proper support to their teachers, they would be in a far better position to support them over time. And another important thing that was happening during this period was that the profession of early childhood itself began to recognize that children of color and diverse cultures were being suspended and expelled at much higher rates than children with white European backgrounds. And teachers were always struggling to keep these children in their classrooms. And this new research just reinforced Barbara's determination to help leaders learn to support their teachers. And that's why we decided to write this book, so we could help.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. At NACCE, we have received a growing number of requests from programs and individuals for resources to support situations like the one you talked about with Andrew and Justin. And we are thrilled to now be able to share your book as a helpful resource. Barbara, I would love to hear your thoughts on what's happening in early childhood right now that makes this such a timely book.
Well, oddly enough, there's several things, and I think what comes to my mind first is the impact of the pandemic, which wasn't necessarily part of our rationale in the very beginning, but it certainly became more and more important to us as time went on because it has affected children's behavior. And the job of educators and administrators, whether in childcare or elementary school, is now harder than ever, not only due to the new regulations and requirements of COVID-19 on top of what they already had to do, but also the fact that we're all dealing with our own responses to COVID. And it's not only affecting children's ability to self-regulate, but it's also affecting their educators and their leaders. And also, it's usually the leader's decision as to whether or not to expel a child or suspend a child. And it's vital to remember at all times that when a child is expelled or suspended from a childcare center or elementary school, the consequences are extremely dire. The research is clear. Teachers need extra help to support children with challenging behavior, especially those of color and from diverse cultures, especially if the educator's culture is very different from that of the child who is engaging in the challenging behavior. So even though suspension and expulsion are an adult's decision, they really should never be an option.
COVID has definitely been a significant impact to our field, and it has probably heightened the need for support for teachers. Barbara, what key lessons are leaders going to come away with after reading the book? What's the main idea you want them to walk away with?
I think too many teachers feel that when there's a child in their group or center with challenging behavior, that they get too little support. And sometimes, maybe more often than I'd like to think about, they're often afraid to ask for it. And even though administrators feel bogged down in paperwork, it's important for them to bridge the gap between their staff and find ways to spend time in the classroom so they can really support their teachers and see what's going on. All too often, they just don't understand. And one of the things that happened with my staff sometimes was the sense of, well, you can come in and you can observe, or you can play with the kids, or you can be there, but you get to leave. But we're here all the time. So we need to, as administrators, to spend more time in the classroom so that we can actually see what we can do and what changes really need to be made. And in order to do this, leaders need to understand more about what really puts children at risk and what's the importance of prevention. I think we forget about prevention. We're so focused on responding. We need to understand effective ways to respond to children's challenging behavior and what professional development the teachers feel they need. Leaders also need to reflect on their own attitudes and responsibilities, their leadership style, and most of all, their relationship with their staff. They need to know more about the lives and the concerns of their educators and the families. Where are they living? How are they living? What are their personal challenges? What types of feelings do they bring with them when they come to work every day? And it's also important to determine what is the role of the director when the challenging behavior occurs. Sending a child to the director or principal's office is not a solution. As the director of a not-for-profit community-based center, I actually had a rule. Children were not to be sent to my office for disciplinary reasons. Instead, the educators were to let me know when there was a problem, and I would go to the classroom to be with the other children so they could work with that child who needed their support. It wasn't up to me to work with that child because the educator needs to build that relationship. I just needed to support the other kids so that the educator, the teacher could. Just as much as the teachers, I had a role to play. And because as the leader, I am responsible for the safety and well-being of all the children, I need to be sure that I can be part of that piece of helping them to support all the children, but especially that child.
I love this, Barbara, and that visual of the leader being there to support the teachers so that the teachers then can support the children, but the teacher can also support that child who might need some extra help. How will this book help school and early childhood program leaders support their teachers and families?
Well, one of the things I realized when our Andrew came to the center, the staff had been together for several years. They were extremely qualified, but within 2 weeks, Andrew turned everything upside down. And all of a sudden, a confident staff felt that they lacked the information, the skills, and the time to deal with the child. And I think often directors and principals don't recognize that they do have the time, they have to make the time, but they don't feel they have the time or the skills themselves. So our goal in writing this book was to provide information on trauma-informed practice, cultural and linguistic diversity, equity and implicit bias, and strategies that are research-based and proven effective that can help teachers prevent and respond effectively to challenging behavior. It's a process. It takes a lot of time and a lot of information and a lot of teamwork.
That's great. And it sounds like this can be that helpful resource to be able to help guide for some discussions that can be very helpful for teachers to be more effective in the classrooms.
We hope so.
I'd love to hear from each of you. What is your favorite part of the book and why? Judy?
I particularly like a chapter called Enabling Your Staff to Act, because it's so vital for teachers to think about the role they play when a child loses control, and it's all up to them to figure out what they can do differently instead of blaming the child or the family. Um, there are obviously a great many factors that influence staff behavior, but we cover some of the most important ones in the book. For example, there's something called the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the part of the brain whose job is to alert us to danger. So when a child's behavior pushes a teacher's buttons, the amygdala senses danger and rushes into action, causing the teacher to react completely automatically without thinking at all. And she can make the situation worse rather than better. But if teachers know about this phenomenon, they can learn some ways to control their own behavior ahead of time. Another important factor is the teacher's own culture, which influences her expectations of what children should or should not do. But if the teacher's culture is different from the family's culture, as Barbara mentioned before, there can be a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. For example, the teacher's culture may value independence, so she may teach the children how to put on their own jackets. But this may upset the family because in their culture, it's the adults whose responsibility it is to dress the children. And then, in addition, we have lots of unconscious attitudes and biases that drive the way we take in information and make decisions that we're not even aware of. So it's really important to know about these possibilities and talk about how it's possible to deal with them.
Great. Thank you, Judy. And Barbara, what is your favorite part of the book?
That's a really kind of hard question for me because having lived this for so many years, I think all of it is really important. But one of the things, because of my own personal experience, I found the hardest was how to navigate change. So I think the most important chapter for me is about change because it is such a significant factor when looking at how to prevent and even to respond to a child's challenging behavior. And it's very difficult for people to change their attitudes and their behavior, whether it's a child or an adult. Change is a process, and teachers, especially experienced teachers, may have to unlearn what they already know in order to learn ways of thinking about behavior in a different way and alter their own responses to the behavior. I think this chapter provides a lot of valuable insights into why educators may resist change, how to encourage them to buy into it, and how to create an action plan together, which we found to be really important It can't be a top-down decision. It is all about that teamwork and communication.
Great, thank you. So chapter 5 and 7, I have them on notes. Can, can you describe your writing partnership and how it works? What does the research for a book like this entail? Can you describe some of the research ideas, the research behind the ideas in the book?
After Barbara's very unsuccessful experience with Andrew, and later her much more successful experience with Justin, she wanted to share what she and her staff had learned that could actually make a difference in children's lives. And that was when we began to concentrate on challenging behavior. And because of her many years of training and experience, Barbara's great strength is in the practical aspects of relating to teachers and children and families, whereas my strengths are writing and research. We believe it's important for everything we write to be research-based. And then I have a secret weapon, my husband, who's a neurologist, who has helped us to find reliable research on the brain's role in challenging behavior. But probably the most relevant research behind the ideas in this book was done quite some time ago by scholars like Robert O'Neill, George Sugai, and Rob Horner. And that's the research on something called functional assessment. Now, functional assessment is based on an extremely powerful concept, which is that behavior is actually a form of communication. So when children don't have any other way to tell us that they can't solve a problem or that their needs aren't being met, they may use challenging behavior to tell us. And then it's up to us, the adults, the teachers, the families, the leaders, to gather enough information to figure out what's triggering the challenging behavior. And then they can teach the child more appropriate ways to fulfill those needs and solve those problems.
Thank you, Judy. Sounds like a great partnership, and great to have a neurologist as a resource that you could bring in to help with it.
Very, very helpful, I have to say.
Yes. Last question. Do you have any words of advice for leaders today?
I think just maybe the best way to sum it up is that leaders, whether they're directors or principals, need to support the staff and the families they work with to help them become part of the solution and not just feel as though they are part of the problem. It's all too easy to blame them. However, they're probably blaming themselves enough already. We need to help them see their strengths and the difference that they can make and help them learn the skills to support their child so that they can deal with, the child can deal with their problems, their thoughts, their needs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you, Judy, for your time today and sharing your insights and your stories. And thank you to our audience listening in. As a reminder, this book and other resources are available on the NAEYC store on our website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.